No family ever stayed in this house for long. Sooner or later, every one of them disappeared. The story opens on a family who have only just moved in. The place is enormous, and the rooms are still stacked with boxes nobody has gotten around to unpacking. There is Kira, her husband Brian, their teenage daughter Ellie, and Ellie's younger brother Stephen. Stephen loves it here. He has never had this much space to run around in. Ellie hates it. To her, this house is nothing but distance. Distance from her friends, from her old school, from the entire life she was forced to leave behind. As she wanders through the rooms, she starts noticing things the previous owner left behind. Old paintings nobody took down, and above almost every single door, a strange symbol with a small triangle marked underneath it. When she asks her mother why none of it has been cleared out, Kira brushes it off. They have only just arrived. Most of it will end up in the trash eventually. Then Ellie decides to look at the basement. It is dark down there, and far larger than it should be, with an atmosphere that makes you want to leave the moment you arrive. And while she is standing at the bottom, the basement door swings shut on its own. At first she assumes her brother is playing a joke. Then she hears her father on the other side and realizes he cannot get the door open either. Trapped in the dark, Ellie begins to feel certain that something down there is watching her. Brian eventually finds a key hanging on the wall and gets her out, but the feeling does not leave her. Something is wrong with this house. Later, Kira comes upstairs to check on her. Ellie is 15 and furious, and the conversation goes nowhere. Kira tries to tell her about a project she is working on. Ellie tells her flatly that she hates her mother's job. Before she goes, Kira asks Ellie to watch Stephen that evening because she and Brian will both be working late. Ellie agrees, but only barely. She asks one more time why they had to move here at all. Kira says it is for the family's future. It is not an answer that satisfies anyone. That night, both parents leave, and the two children are alone in the house. Missing her old life, Ellie sits on the floor, talking to a friend on the phone. Behind her, without a sound, the door slowly swings open by itself. She does not notice. A little while later, Stephen jumps out at her, wearing a skull mask, and after she has finished shouting at him, he shows her where he found it. There is a cabinet in the playroom. Inside it is dark, thick with dust, and hung with cobwebs, and sitting in there with the mask is an old gramophone, which somehow still works perfectly. Ellie sets the needle down. A man's voice comes out of it, reciting what sounds like a mathematical formula, and then he begins to count. As the counting continues, the electricity in the house starts to falter. Lights dim. Something in the walls hums. Ellie feels it before she understands it, and she lifts the needle before the man reaches the end. For a second, the house is completely silent, and the lights come back up as though nothing had happened at all. Ellie stands there with her hand still resting on the machine, waiting for something else to follow. Nothing does, and somehow that makes it worse. On the record itself, someone has written a name, along with the same formula the voice just recited. It should trouble her more than it does. But Ellie is 15, and she has already decided that this entire house is one long bad mood, so she puts the record back where she found it and tells herself to forget about it. She sends Stephen up to bed and spends the rest of the evening on her own in front of the television. What she does not see is the cold draft beginning to pour out from under the basement door. Then the lights start flickering. Devices shut themselves off one by one, and finally the television goes black. She calls her mother in a panic and tells her the power is gone. Kira assumes it is a breaker and asks Ellie to go down to the basement and check it. Ellie refuses immediately. She has been trapped down there once already, but Kira keeps reassuring her and promises to stay on the line the entire time. It is the thought of Stephen waking up alone in the dark that finally moves her. With nothing but a candle, Ellie starts down the stairs. To keep her calm, Kira tells her to count the steps as she goes. There are only 10 steps to the bottom. Ellie counts 1, 2, 3, 4. Her mother's voice keeps her steady. 5, 6, 7, 8. Everything is completely ordinary until she reaches the 10th step, and then her body simply drops, as though something has switched her off. But through the phone, Kira can still hear her daughter's voice. Ellie is still counting. 11, 12, 13. There are only 10 steps in that staircase, and the numbers keep climbing. Worse, Ellie has stopped responding to her own name. Kira calls out to her again and again, and gets nothing back but numbers. She and Brian leave work immediately and drive home. They go straight to the basement. Ellie is not there. There is no sign of a struggle. Nothing knocked over. Nothing to indicate where she went. She has simply stopped existing. The police are called, and a full search of the neighborhood begins. It turns up absolutely nothing. Brian tries to convince his wife that Ellie ran away, that she was miserable about the move, and that she has run off before. Kira will not accept it. She cannot shake the certainty that whatever happened to her daughter happened in that basement. Days go by with no sign of her. Search teams keep working. Kira is being eaten alive by guilt because she is the one who told Ellie to go down those stairs. Brian keeps insisting Ellie is sleeping on a friend's couch somewhere. Kira knows better. Every instinct she has says her daughter vanished the moment she entered the basement, so she stops waiting and starts investigating on her own. She puts missing person posters up across town. She goes to the police station almost daily. She contacts anyone who ever spoke to Ellie. None of it produces a single answer. The police interview Ellie's friends, comb through her social media, and pull security footage from every camera in the area. They find nothing usable. They do discover that Ellie had been badly bullied online, and they treat that as a motive to run. Kira does not believe it for a second. She tells them plainly. Her daughter did not run away. Something happened in that cellar. Back at the house, she notices a phrase carved above the front door. Solve et coagula. It is not English, and it is not decoration. She looks it up and finds that it is old and that it belongs to alchemy. Roughly translated, it means that a thing must first be broken apart before it can be put back together as something else. Somebody carved that sentence over the entrance to the house her daughter disappeared inside of, and nobody who lived here since has ever asked why. She starts trying to reconstruct the night Ellie vanished and asks Stephen whether anything unusual happened before his sister disappeared. He tells her about the old gramophone in the cabinet and the record they played together. At the time, it does not seem important to her at all. What she keeps returning to is the basement, so she goes back down with an ultraviolet flashlight, and what it shows her is genuinely disturbing. Each of the 10 steps has a number carved into it, 1 through 10, and on the floor at the bottom is a mathematical formula cut into the concrete. The walls are covered in drawings that only exist under ultraviolet light. The police look at all of it and see nothing but graffiti, unrelated to a missing girl. Kira becomes more certain than ever that the house itself is hiding something. When the police ask where they bought the property, Brian explains that it came up at auction, and that they got it for a price that should have been a warning. Nobody asked why it was so cheap. That night, after settling Stephen back to sleep, Kira wakes to a faint whispering somewhere in the house. She follows it. It sounds like a voice, quietly counting. The counting leads her through room after room until she finds herself standing outside the basement door. On her way there, she accidentally kicks a ball, and it rolls down into the darkness below. The counting stops instantly. When she turns the basement lights on, the ball is gone. There is nothing on the floor at all, except that formula carved into the concrete. For the first time, Kira starts to suspect that the symbols, the numbers, and everything happening in this house are pieces of the same thing. She stands at the bottom of the stairs for a long moment, listening. The house is making none of the ordinary noises a house makes at night. No pipes, no settling timber, no traffic outside, just her own breathing and the distinct sense that the room is waiting for her to leave. The next day she starts studying the markings above the doorways and asks Brian if he knows what they are. He does not, and he thinks she is forcing a connection that is not there. Kira trusts her instincts anyway. She contacts the auction agent and asks for records on the previous owner. He does not have the full file and asks her for time. Rather than wait, she photographs every symbol in the house and sends them to a colleague at work. Her colleague comes back with an answer. The symbols are Hebrew letters. On their own, they mean very little. Arranged in the right order, they spell out a single name, Leviathan. Kira cannot stop turning that word over while she drives to collect Stephen from school, where she learns he has been in a fight. A classmate told him his sister was dead and Stephen hit him. At home, she starts reading about Leviathan and finds a creature out of ancient legend, enormous and old. The more she reads, the more her attention turns back to the house itself, and then to the gramophone Ellie and Stephen played on the last night anyone saw her. She decides to play the record again. John's voice recites the formula and then begins to count. And while it plays, in another room, objects start moving on their own. The cabinet door creaks open by itself. Stephen, standing in the playroom, goes blank. He walks toward the cabinet, repeating the numbers coming from the machine in perfect time. The instant Kira hears her son counting, she stops the record. Stephen snaps back, confused, with no memory of any of it. That is the moment Kira stops doubting. The gramophone is connected to whatever is happening to her family. Studying one of the paintings the previous owner left behind, she finally identifies the man in it. His name is John Fetherston. He was a physicist, and he disappeared years ago. And he was not the only one. Almost his entire family vanished with him. Inside this house, the same house Kira and her family now sleep in. The records are thin, and the dates do not entirely line up, but the pattern is impossible to miss. People went into this house and did not come out of it, and that was decades before Kira ever saw the listing. Only one Fetherston is known to have survived, John's youngest daughter, Rose. That night, it starts again. The basement door swings open by itself. The lights go out room by room until the house is completely dark, exactly as it did the night Ellie disappeared. And out of that silence, Kira hears Stephen calling for help from behind the locked basement door. She throws herself at it and cannot open it. His voice keeps coming from inside. The key has gone from the wall. She crouches down and looks through the keyhole, and what is standing on the other side is not a person. And then, moments later, Stephen appears behind her, completely unharmed, which means whatever was calling her from behind that door was never her son at all. A short time later, the basement door opens by itself, and the power comes back as though nothing happened. The key that vanished is lying on the floor. Kira picks it up and hangs it back on its hook. Then she gathers her nerve and goes down alone, looking for answers. The moment she steps inside, the door slams shut behind her. Her phone, the only light she has, is knocked out of her hand when a sudden gust of wind cuts through the room. And then she hears it, something growling. Footsteps, somewhere out in the dark, coming closer. Outside, Stephen struggles to reach the key, and even once he has it, the lock will not turn. Brian gets home just in time and forces the door open. Kira tells him everything. Brian cannot bring himself to believe her. To him, this is grief. His wife lost a daughter, and her mind is doing what grieving minds do. Kira refuses to drop it. She asks him to go down and look for the phone she dropped, hoping that once he is standing in that room, he will finally understand. Brian never finds the phone. What he finds instead is a clump of hair on the floor that has no business being there. And for a moment, he thinks he sees something move in the dark. He talks himself out of it and goes back upstairs, still calling it coincidence. The next day, Kira goes to a university and meets a mathematics professor named Remy. He tells himself it is a trick of the torchlight. He has been awake for most of 3 days, and a man who has not slept properly sees things at the edges of rooms. That is what he decides to believe, because the alternative is so much worse. She shows him the formula from the basement floor. Remy takes one look and knows it is not ordinary. He tells her the equation is far more complex than it has any right to be, and that it is almost certainly not describing a calculation. When she mentions the name John Fetherston, Remy goes still. The office he is sitting in used to be John's, before John disappeared. He is fascinated by it, and he is also careful. He tells her he needs real time with the equation before he will say anything definitive, because whatever it is, guessing at it would be worse than useless. Kira goes home and tries to hold her life together and to behave like a person whose daughter is going to walk back through the door. Remy calls her back, and what he tells her is not about the formula. He says he has been trying to reach her for days on her old number. Kira explains that her old phone disappeared in the basement, and she had to buy a new one and transfer the number across. That is exactly what unsettles him, because before she reactivated it, somebody answered one of his calls. There was no conversation, no greeting, just a voice, endlessly counting numbers. Then he gives her his findings. He consulted colleagues in France, and the same formula has surfaced once before, in a case involving an old house in Belgium. Every single resident of that house vanished without a trace. The formula itself dates to the 15th century and is attributed to an alchemist. Nobody knows what it was built to do, but everything about it points toward travel between dimensions. Kira takes this back to Brian, along with the symbols, and tells him they spell out Leviathan. She still cannot explain the triangles underneath. Brian thinks she has gone from grief into mythology, so she takes him down to the basement and shows him the numbers carved into every step and the formula cut into the floor. He still will not accept it. While they are arguing, the cabinet in the playroom swings open on its own. Stephen goes to look and finds that the inside of it is darker than it was, and deeper, much deeper. Upstairs, a furious Brian starts striking the formula in the floor, trying to destroy it. It does not chip. Instead, the concrete gives off a low metallic hum, as though something underneath is resonating with the blow. At that exact moment, in another room, the gramophone begins playing by itself. John Featherston's voice recites the formula and starts counting, and as the numbers echo through the house, Stephen, standing in front of that cabinet, watches a figure walk out of the darkness inside it. He recognizes her instantly. It is Ellie. He screams for his parents. By the time Kira and Brian reach him, she is gone. Every strange thing in the house stops at the same instant. The moment the recording reaches 10, they do not find Ellie, but Brian finds her phone on the floor beside the cabinet. A phone that was not there an hour ago, in a house that has been searched by police. That is what finally breaks him. He has spent weeks explaining every one of these things away, and standing there holding his daughter's phone, he cannot call any of it coincidence anymore. Looking for answers, Kira goes to find the only surviving Featherston, John's youngest daughter Rose, who is now elderly and living in a nursing home. Kira tells her that she has moved into her old house and that her daughter is missing. The moment Rose hears it, her whole manner changes. When Kira asks her what really happened in that house, Rose does not speak. She writes down a single word, Leviathan. Then she explains. Her father was a respected scientist once. Everything changed when someone in the family became seriously ill. Desperate, John started looking for answers past the edge of science and became obsessed with something he called Leviathan. And Rose tells her one more thing. The problem is not the basement, It is the whole house. Before Kira leaves, Rose says something else. Her father never thought of it as summoning anything. He thought of it as solving. He believed he had found a door that had always been there, and that the only reason nobody had opened it was that nobody had worked out the arithmetic. And once he had, he could not stop himself walking through it. Driving home, Kira tries to call Remy. The line connects, and again all she hears is that voice, counting without end. Meanwhile, Brian, who finally believes his wife, has been studying the symbols himself. He takes the small triangles beneath each one and arranges them together, and they resolve into a pentagram. When Kira gets home, he shows her what he has found. The symbol is the sigil of Baphomet, an emblem tied to the worship of very old things, and it goes further. The hand gesture Baphomet is shown making is the exact pose John Fetherston is holding in the portrait hanging in their hallway. Even the phrase above the front door, solve et coagula, belongs to the same tradition. While they are piecing this together, Stephen is flying his drone through the house. It suddenly stops answering the controls and turns on its own toward the basement. Stephen follows it down without any idea what is waiting for him. At the same time, upstairs, Kira decides to play John's record one more time, hoping for another clue. She has no idea where her son is. The voice recites the formula, and it starts to count. Down in the basement, the counting takes hold of Stephen exactly the way it took his sister. He loses awareness and starts walking down the stairs in time with the numbers. At the bottom, he comes back to himself, just long enough to pick up his drone, and standing directly beside him is Baphomet. The power dies across the whole house. Stephen screams. Kira and Brian run for the basement, and by the time they get there, he is gone. All that is left on the floor is the drone. Then a ball rolls out of the dark toward them. Kira recognizes it. It is the same ball she kicked down those stairs weeks ago, the one that vanished. And then they hear counting. They follow it, and they find Stephen standing inside the cabinet, which is now far darker and far larger on the inside than it can possibly be. They pull him out. His body is burning hot. When they lift his shirt, there is a pentagram carved into his chest. It is not a wound anybody could have made. The skin around it is raised and clean, as though the shape had been pressed into him from the inside rather than cut into him from the outside, and it is warm to the touch. Still in a trance, Stephen tells them he has just been riding a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. Then he goes back to counting. Kira turns to find Brian, and Brian is gone too. She finds him in the same state, counting under his breath, taken by the same thing that took Stephen and Ellie. And then Brian's counting reverses. It becomes a countdown, and when it reaches the last number, something in the basement starts moving toward them. Kira turns and comes face to face with Baphomet. There is nowhere left to run except down. She goes into the basement and finds that the staircase, the one with exactly 10 steps, has become a passage with no end at all. With the creature behind her, she has no choice but to keep descending, and she keeps descending until she arrives somewhere that should not exist. A vast dark world holding thousands, maybe millions of people from every era and every country, standing in enormous silent lines. Some of them are dressed for centuries that ended a long time ago. None of them look up. None of them stop. All of them are counting, endlessly, in 100 different languages, and not one of them seems to know that anybody else is there. Standing there, Kira finally understands all of it. The formula in the floor, the symbols above the doors, the numbers carved into the staircase, and the recording. They were never separate things. John Fetherston found a way to open a path into another world. He did not do it with a ritual. He did it with mathematics and with a sequence of numbers preserved on a record. Every time that record plays, anyone who hears it begins to fall under it, repeating the numbers without knowing they are doing it. And the basement is the mechanism. It was never really a basement. It is a doorway. When someone under the influence of that recording walks down those stairs while counting, the boundary between the two worlds opens, which is exactly what happened to Ellie. On the night of the blackout, she heard the record, and then she went down into the dark, counting the steps, because her mother told her to. She reached the 10th step, and the counting did not stop. There were no stairs left, and she kept going, straight through the doorway and into whatever lies beyond it. Among all those endless lines of people, Kira spots a tattoo she recognizes. It is Ellie's. She fights through the crowd and finds her daughter, dazed, counting like everyone else. Kira manages to pull her out of it and leads her back toward the staircase. She can hear Baphomet's footsteps behind them the entire way. The creature never tries to stop them. Something about that is wrong, but she keeps going until they are back inside the house. Ellie starts to recover. Stephen and Brian come back to themselves. For one moment, Kira believes it is over. The house is the problem, so the family decides to leave that night. And when Kira opens the front door, there is no street outside. There is only a staircase, descending into darkness, with no end. That is when she understands. They never came back. All this time she believed only Ellie had been taken. In reality, every play of that record and every trip into that basement had been pulling all of them across, a little at a time. That is why Baphomet never stopped her, not because she escaped, because there was nowhere to escape to. The house had already stopped being part of this world. Behind her, Ellie, Stephen, and Brian begin to count again and walk toward the basement, and Kira finds herself following them, quietly counting